Did you know that most women who have abortions are actually already moms?
Wow.
It's kind of a surprising stat, right?
Sure.
It really makes you stop and think. And that's what we're doing today. We're taking a deep dive into the stories you don't always hear about abortion, the real experiences of women shared on the You're Wrong About podcast.
Yeah, it's such a valuable collection of voices. You don't often get to hear this perspective.
It's a sensitive topic for
Yeah.
sure, but these stories really give you a glimpse into what it's like, the emotions, the choices, the whole experience.
And Sarah Marshall, the host, she does a really amazing job of creating a safe space for these women to just share openly and honestly. There's no judgment, no shame.
One thing that really struck me was how different all the stories were. There's this idea that abortion always comes from like crisis or trauma,
Yeah.
but a lot of these women were talking about making really thought out choices.
Exactly. Like we heard from this 24-year-old woman, she just bought her first house, her career was taking off, and she was like, having a kid right now would totally derail my dreams. Abortion was about protecting her future.
It makes you realize that for a lot of women, abortion is about control,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm?
about making choices about their bodies that fit with their life goals.
Mm-hmm.
There was this other story that stuck with me too. This woman who actually found some humor in how the men in her life reacted when she got pregnant.
Oh, yeah, I remember that
It
one.
was like suddenly all these guys wanted to be the hero,
Mm.
you know, offering solutions and opinions.
Right, right. Like it was their problem to solve.
Exactly. And it just highlighted how much pressure there is on women. This expectation that they should put motherhood above everything else.
Totally.
But she wasn't having any of it. She was like, this is my decision, my body, and I'm going to choose what's best for me.
It was such a powerful moment. Like you could really feel her strength.
Yeah, and it kind of speaks to this bigger theme that came up over and over, the complexity of choice.
Hmm.
Some stories were about taking control, but others were about really, really tough situations.
Like the woman who had an ectopic pregnancy.
Right. For her, abortion wasn't just a choice, it was to save her life. It makes you realize how crucial the healthcare aspect of abortion is.
Absolutely. And we also heard from a woman who had to terminate her pregnancy at 18 weeks because of really severe fetal abnormalities.
I can't even imagine how difficult that decision must have been, the emotional toll.
It just breaks your heart. And it forces you to face this reality that sometimes abortion isn't about wanting or not wanting a child. It's about facing impossible choices when things go wrong.
And then there was a story of the woman who was in an abusive relationship.
Oh, yeah.
For her, abortion was about survival, getting out of a dangerous situation, reclaiming her life.
It's a powerful example of how abortion can be about self-love, too. Choosing yourself and your well-being, even when you're going through something awful.
And even with all these difficult stories, there was this constant thread of gratitude for having access to safe, legal abortion.
Right. It really makes you think about all the restrictions that are happening, the barriers women are facing to get this essential health care.
Like we heard from a woman in Nigeria who had to get an illegal abortion because of the laws in her country.
It's scary.
She risked everything, her health, her freedom, just to get the care she needed. It's a reminder of what happens when access is denied.
It's a completely different world from the story we heard from a woman in Australia, where abortion is just treated as health care, not some moral battleground.
Right. She talked about having this supportive and compassionate experience where she felt respected and empowered.
It shows how much the social and legal context shapes the whole experience.
Yeah, and it makes you realize that access isn't just about legality. It's about creating a system that supports women, respects their choices, and provides compassionate care without judgment.
It's about treating them like human beings.
Exactly. It's crazy how different things are in different places.
Okay.
And, you talk about different experiences. We also heard from this woman in the U.S. who had an abortion back in 2004.
Okay.
And she was saying how much harder it would be to get that same care now in 2022.
It's really sad. It's like we're going backwards when it comes to reproductive rights. It's a wake-up call that access to safe abortion is not something we can take for granted.
It's a fight for basic health care, for the right to make decisions about our own bodies.
Mm.
And it's personal for so many women. We heard from one woman who had 3 kids already, and she just knew she was done.
Yeah.
It wasn't some big dramatic thing,
Yeah.
just a practical decision about what was best for her and her family.
And a lot of people could relate to that. It turns out a lot of women who get abortions are already moms. It challenges that stereotype, that it's just something young single women think about.
It's true. And it also made me think about something I hadn't really considered before, the emotional side of choosing abortion after having a miscarriage.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that adds another layer of grief of loss. And making those decisions in those circumstances must be so incredibly hard.
And speaking of difficult decisions, there's another story that really stayed with me. This woman was in her late 30s, loved being a mom to her 3 kids, but she just knew in her heart that she was done having children.
What's interesting about her story is that it led her to become this huge advocate for reproductive rights.
Yeah.
She wrote a book, started a podcast. It became this big part of her life.
It's amazing how personal experience can lead to positive change.
Yeah.
By sharing her story, she's helping to break down the stigma and get people talking more openly about abortion.
Definitely.
And we heard from another mom who already had 2 little kids, like toddlers.
Oh, God.
And she realized bringing another baby into the mix would just be too much.
Too overwhelming.
She talked about this feeling of relief after the procedure, like a sense of empowerment in choosing what was best for herself and her kids. It's a reminder that sometimes abortion is about responsibility, recognizing your limits and putting your family's well-being first.
And it's even more powerful when you consider that her partner left her right after the abortion. Can you imagine going through that with another baby to care for?
It's hard to even think about. It shows how abortion can be a way to protect yourself and your family from even more hardship.
And it's a reminder that we can't judge. You never know what someone's going through or why they're making the choices they make. Every woman deserves to make the choice that's right for her without being judged or shamed.
Right. And it's important to remember that not all abortion stories are about early pregnancies. We heard from a woman who had to make the incredibly tough decision to terminate her pregnancy at 18 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Her story was especially heartbreaking because she and her husband were so excited at first. They were already making plans for the baby, imagining their future.
Yeah.
And then they found out about these severe fetal abnormalities. I can't imagine the emotional roller coaster they went through.
It's just devastating. The loss of that future, the weight of making a choice that no one ever wants to have to make.
And she talked about how grateful she was for the medical team.
Yeah.
How compassionate and skilled they were. It highlighted how important it is to have supportive healthcare providers in those situations.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And it also makes you realize how important it is for women to have access to good information and prenatal care so they can make informed decisions about their pregnancy.
Exactly. Because when you restrict access to safe abortion, it doesn't mean abortions stop happening. It just means women are forced into dangerous situations.
Exactly.
We heard from a woman in Nigeria who had to go through so much just to get the care she needed,
It's so risky.
risking her health and safety.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder of what happens when we deny women access to safe and legal abortion.
It pushes them to desperate measures and puts their lives in danger. It's a global issue that we can't ignore.
It's heartbreaking to think about how many women around the world are facing those kinds of barriers. And it makes the stories of women who do have access even more important. Like the woman we heard from earlier who had her abortion in 2004.
Right.
She talked about how much harder it would be to get that same care now. It's chilling to see how reproductive rights are being eroded, how access is being chipped away in so many places.
It's scary how quickly things can change.
It shows that we can't take these rights for granted. They're constantly under attack, and we have to fight to protect them.
Absolutely. And hearing it from someone who actually experienced that loss of access makes it even more real.
And it brings us back to why it's so important to listen to these stories, to understand what women are really going through. When we hear about the woman in Nigeria struggling to get safe care, and then we hear about the woman in Australia being treated with dignity and respect,
Yeah.
it shows how much social and political climates affect women's reproductive experiences.
It's a stark contrast. It highlights the need for healthcare systems that actually care about women's well-being, their choices, and their right to make decisions about their own bodies.
It really makes you appreciate what we have here and how important it is to keep fighting for those rights for everyone. And, listening to all these stories, it's clear that there's no one abortion experience.
Right.
Every woman's journey is different, shaped by her own situation, beliefs, support system.
Absolutely. We heard from one woman who actually had an abortion while she was working for an abortion fund. Wow.
It just shows you that this can happen to anyone, no matter their background or beliefs. And she talked about how having access to resources and information made her decisions so much easier.
It shows how important it is to have that support and education to help women make these choices. And she actually chose to have a self-managed abortion using pills.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something we're hearing about more and more these days.
It is. It's great that there are more options now, more control for women over their own bodies.
And I thought it was really interesting how she talked about gaining a new respect for women who choose to have their babies after going through her own abortion experience. It just shows how going through something so personal and challenging can really change your perspective on motherhood and choices.
It definitely challenges us to be less judgmental and more understanding of different paths.
And then there was the woman who shared her story of hiding her pregnancy and ultimately choosing adoption.
Her experience was so full of isolation, shame, pressure to fit in. It's sad that even now some women feel so alone and afraid to get help or talk about what they're going through.
It really shows the stigma that's still out there around unplanned pregnancies, the lack of support.
And the part that really got to me was when she mentioned considering using a coat hanger.
Oh gosh.
It's a chilling reminder of what women will do when they don't have safe options.
It just highlights how crucial it is to have access to safe, legal abortion.
Exactly.
Fair.
Restricting access doesn't make the need go away. It just makes it dangerous. It's
Exactly.
a message we can't ignore. And even though she ended up choosing adoption, she still said she wished she'd had the option of abortion.
It shows that even when there are other choices, the right to choose abortion is still so important. It's about having control over your body, your future, no matter what you decide.
And her story really makes you think about the need for better support for women who are facing unplanned pregnancies. No matter what they choose, whether it's abortion, adoption, or parenting, they deserve to feel supported and empowered.
Absolutely. It's about creating a society where women feel safe to talk about their experiences, to get help, to make choices that align with their own values and circumstances.
And you know, her story got me thinking about family reactions, which reminded me of another woman who shared her mother's abortion story.
Interesting.
It was so powerful to hear how her mother had made that choice for herself back when it was legal and safe, and how it allowed her to go to school, build a career, and eventually choose motherhood when she was ready.
It's a great example of how abortion can give women the power to shape their own lives, create the future they want, and become mothers on their own terms.
It also challenges that whole "what would your mother say" argument that anti-abortion folks use.
Yeah.
In this case, the daughter was so proud to say that her mom was totally supportive of her fight for reproductive rights.
It shows how these conversations can change within families over generations, and it shows why it's so important to keep sharing our stories, to break the silence and fight the stigma.
Because when we share our stories, we connect with each other. We build empathy and understanding. And that's what these women have done on the You're Wrong About podcast.
They've given us a real look into the many sides of abortion, the personal journeys, the tough choices, and the huge impact that access to safe legal abortion has on women's lives.
It's been an incredible deep dive. So many powerful stories.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up, what stands out to you the most? What's the key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
For me, it's the fact that there's no one abortion story. It's a deeply personal experience, and it's different for everyone. To really get it, we have to move past the politics and the simple narratives and just listen to the women who've been through it. Only then can we start to break down the stigma, build empathy, and work towards a world where all women can make choices about their bodies and their lives without fear or judgment.
That's so well said. And as one of the women in the podcast said, everyone loves someone who has had an abortion. It's a powerful reminder that this is a human issue that affects all of us. We need more compassion and understanding. So as we finish up this deep dive, I'm wondering, how do these stories change how we think about abortion? And how can we use what we've learned to create a world where reproductive rights are protected for all women?